This event occurred last year, during the beginning of spring. At that time, we were experiencing a rainy month where almost every day there was some kind of downpour, whether it was a light drizzle or a full-on storm. I work as a delivery person for a well-known restaurant in my area, so having to run through the rain all the time to pick up and drop off orders is not ideal. One night, I started my shift at 6 p.m. and drove around to complete a couple of orders before receiving one that was somewhat far away. The delivery location was about 10 minutes out from our restaurant and was situated in a more wooded part of town. It wasn't completely forested, but it was more spread out and less densely populated. The roads were all covered by trees, and most neighborhoods were not visible from the main roads. While driving, there was only one car behind me, which was not unusual given how empty the road was. However, when I was about 2 miles in, a beam of headlights suddenly appeared in front of me, revealing a car in the middle of the road at 12:48. The car swerved to a stop, blocking the entire road. The driver behind me did the same, stopping so close to me that I was surprised we didn't collide. After the initial shock, I looked up at the car in the middle of the road. It was a beat-up looking sedan, and they had their brights on, making it too blinding to see who was inside. It seemed as though the driver had intentionally left their headlights off until the last second when they swerved into the road. I couldn't see where they came from because it was too dark, so I'm not sure if they were just driving down the road or if they came from the side of the road. The car behind me honked their horn in frustration. I probably should have been more skeptical, but in the moment when something crazy like this happens, it's hard to think straight. The car behind me was too close for me to move back, and the car in front was blocking the whole way forward, so I couldn't go anywhere unless one of them moved first. After a while, the guy behind me stopped honking and got out of his car. I looked in the mirror and saw a large man walking through the rain. He looked furious as he passed right by my car and walked up to the other. He stood at their window, angrily yelling at whoever was inside. However, with the rain, I could barely hear what he was saying, and I couldn't hear anything at all from the other person if they were even responding. I saw the man outside bang on the window a few times as he yelled, but then he suddenly stopped and went quiet. He slowly backed away from the window and nervously walked back to his car. As he was getting in, the driver's side of the other car opened, and a man stepped out wearing a thick hoodie that covered most of his face. I was now getting really freaked out and still had no way of leaving other than running out of my car and into the woods, which was probably a terrible idea. So, I sat there and watched as the man quickly made his way up to the car behind me. But just as he got to the door, the car floored it backwards. Their tires screeched as they slid against the pavement, losing control and sliding off the road. They made it past a few trees before eventually slamming into one further into the woods. The man that was still on the road turned and looked at my car, making eye contact with me in my side mirror. Horrified, I put my car in reverse and pressed on the gas, backing out past him before turning around and speeding off. I called the police, but I still had no idea what was really going on there that night. An officer arrived at the scene about 15 minutes after I'd left, and the only thing there was the car wedged in the woods against a tree. The other car was gone, and neither of the men were there. We can all assume what probably happened, but there are still a million questions that need answers. All I can say is that if the other guy behind me wasn't there, I likely would be in his place right now. I am employed as a mechanic at a car shop in my town. This establishment is locally owned and operated, having been in business for many years. The shop is located in an old warehouse and has a collection of broken down cars and car parts outside in what we refer to as the scrapyard. The name is just a term we use, as most of the scrapyard is comprised of cars waiting for parts. For the past 2 years, my job has been to order and keep track of stock that comes in and goes out. The best time for me to do this is during non-busy hours, which is overnight. I suppose you could say that I also double as a security guard, as it is not uncommon for individuals, including teenagers, to jump the fence and attempt to mess with or steal from the scrapyard. On this particular night, I arrived at work at 8 p.m. and spoke with my boss for a bit before he left, leaving me alone in the warehouse. It was raining outside, making the inside of the building quite noisy but also calming in a way. I went through my usual routine of checking the orders that the mechanics had sent in and what had been used during the day. There was nothing out of the ordinary, except for 2 cars that needed very specific parts. One of the mechanics had not written down the model year, which can sometimes be crucial information. I got up from the desk and walked through the warehouse, looking for a gray Nissan Versa so that I could confirm the correct part to order. However, I could not find it in the warehouse and realized that it must be in the scrapyard. Of course, it was raining outside, making the task more difficult. I went back to my desk, had a brief coffee break, and then grabbed my jacket and flashlight before heading to the back door. The rain seemed to have picked up since I was last outside, but I could see the car I was looking for hiding between a few other vehicles. I stepped out into the rain and started walking over, turning on my flashlight as I reached the center of the scrapyard. Suddenly, I saw movement from something in front of me. It was at the edge of the light, and I wasn't paying close attention, but it looked like a person moving from behind one of the cars. The rain covered up any sound, so I stood there and held my flashlight up, waiting for any more movement. I yelled, "Hello, I saw you already. Just get out of here." Hoping it was just some kid messing around. I took a few steps closer to where I had seen them and yelled again for them to leave the property. I didn't see anything, so I moved closer and started to look around the whole area. But whoever was there must have already left. I quickly walked over to the Nissan and got the model year before jogging back to the warehouse and going inside. I took off my jacket and sat back at the desk, filling out the rest of the information and sending through the order. I was there for another half hour, filling out more order requests before I had to do the stock counting in the actual warehouse part of the building. By then, it was probably 12:30 or 1 a.m. As I walked along the shelves and checked what everyday products and parts had been used up, a sudden thud rang through the warehouse, and then the lights went out. I stood with my eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but between the sound of the rain hitting the roof, I could hear footsteps walking through the building. I stared in the direction of where the sound was coming from and could immediately tell that they were coming toward me. I didn't know what to do at this point. I was sure that whoever was in there had shut off the power, but I didn't know why they were there. Without light, I couldn't even run away. All I could do was listen to their footsteps grow louder as I stared into the pitch black, hoping they didn't know where I was. They were only about 10 feet away when I heard them stop. After a moment, I heard a box open and things being shifted around before the footsteps began to fade away. I was holding my breath the whole time, and after 30 seconds, it was completely silent. I waited for a few minutes before finally taking my phone out and calling 911. I then used the flashlight on my phone to move toward the breaker room and flip the power switch back on. Looking through the warehouse with the police, all that was left were wet shoe prints going through the building and out the back door. It seemed like the person that was in the scrapyard had probably slipped in while I was outside, and the door was still unlocked. They had stolen a bunch of gear from our warehouse, even though they likely didn't have the intent to hurt me. Who knows what could have happened if they knew I was standing only a few feet from them, and without me ever getting a look at them. There's a chance that they came fully armed and willing to do anything. I had just returned home from work and was relaxing on the couch with a movie playing. It was storming outside, and it was a Friday, so I decided to stay up late and enjoy some television. I kept the window curtains open in case any lightning started, hoping to catch some cool sights. It doesn't rain very often where I live, so nights like these are rare and always get me excited. However, as the night went on, and at just about midnight, I noticed something outside my window across the street. There was a man walking down the sidewalk, completely soaked, with no hood or coat on. He walked up to one of the houses and onto their porch. I couldn't see much through the rain and dark, but it looked like he was waiting for them to enter the door. After a minute, he walked down to the sidewalk again and continued further down the street. I couldn't see any further, but seeing that gave me an uneasy feeling. At this time of night, and in this kind of weather, it just wasn't normal to be walking around and up to people's houses. I closed the curtains by the window just in case he did come to my house. Then he wouldn't see me inside and expect me to answer the door. However, only 15 minutes passed before there was a sound outside my house. Someone was walking up my driveway and up to my front door, but there was no knock or doorbell. I heard them moving around, walking across my porch and near one of the windows, then going back to the door. By now I was really confused and wanted to look out the window, but I was worried that they'd hear me. I waited, and after a minute, there were no more sounds. I quietly walked up to the door and looked out. It was the man I'd seen earlier, and he was still there, standing at the edge of my porch, looking at the door with a blank face. I watched him for a few seconds before I got really creeped out and backed away. It was now that I started to think calling the police would be worth it, especially if he was going around to other people's houses and doing the same thing. I turned to get my phone, but then there was the sound of footsteps departing. I looked out again, and he was gone. After giving it some thought, I felt that this was still too creepy to not inform the police about. Whatever that man was doing was not normal. I called and let them know about it. They said they would send an officer to patrol the neighborhood and see if they could get the man to stop or explain what he was doing, but that was about all that could be done at the time. I thanked them, then hung up and checked out the door one more time before going back to the couch. The whole thing had really worn me out, taking away the relaxing night and just making me exhausted. I shut everything off and went upstairs to get in bed. But as I got in and turned off the lights, a thump sounded from downstairs. I sat up, and then it came again. It was loud, like someone smashing something against the wall. I got up and ran to the top of the stairs, and now hearing it for the third time, I realized it was at the front door. Someone was hitting something against it like they were trying to forcefully break it down. I walked down a few steps and looked over, seeing the door violently shake every time they hit it. It looked like they were just a few hits away from breaking it down. Now, absolutely terrified, I locked myself in the bedroom and called the police again. The operator said that an officer was in the neighborhood and would be here in just a minute. But through their voice, I heard wood shatter and the door slammed against the ground. Footsteps quickly moved through the downstairs, going into every room without stopping. Then they began moving up the stairs, but were cut off by the officer pulling in and running up to the house. The intruder immediately stopped and ran for the back door as the officer came in and yelled at him. And apparently, they had trouble getting the back door open in the heat of the moment, so the officer was able to get him down and into the car. The man, who looked like a psycho up close, refused to say anything, not even a single word, before they drove him off. His intentions were clear, though. He was carrying a heavy hammer and had a bunch of zip ties in his pocket. That doesn't exactly sound like a coincidence considering what he was doing. Why he chose to go for my house isn't clear, though, but what likely saved me was calling the police that first time. If I hadn't, the officer wouldn't have been in the neighborhood so close by, and likely would have gotten here too late for me to have ever been seen again.